So warm welcome to all of you in the audience, and namaste and hello from India. My name is Deepa Sonpal and I welcome you all on behalf of Heartfulness Wellness Programs. These programs are a series of programs and webinars that have been telecast from April since the pandemic is on. Today's webinar is on the World Leprosy Day, and this is being celebrated since 1967. We thought this year, since the theme of the World Literacy Day is to talk about the literacy and education of children, and also about the role of educators and pedagogical changes in the changing scenario, we would talk about children that are from vulnerable sections of society, children who are from poverty, children who are marginalized. So today we have the honor of welcoming four distinguished panelists from Cambodia, from Africa, and two from India. So all the panelists, I welcome you all on behalf of Heartfulness Wellness, and it is a great pleasure to have you with us. Now I would request all the panelists to first introduce themselves and tell a bit about their organization. So first we will have Moses from South Africa, Cape Town. Moses, please introduce yourself and tell a bit about your work.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Deepa, for the invitation to build the panel. My name is Moses Ogutu, and I'm from Kenya, but I'm currently in Cape Town, South Africa. I'm an international trade and development specialist, but at the moment, I'm working as a faculty in international business and trade at the African Leadership University. I also run a leadership and mentorship program targeting former states involved youths. Basically, what we do is we provide a mentorship program for youths that have previously been in the streets, and we identify those with the leadership potential and train them to become leaders, addressing some of the challenges in their communities, as well as the challenge of youth homelessness generally. So our first program and intervention is in Kenya. That's why the program is, and it's about 2 years old now. It's still new, and of course we're still learning from it. But of course, we aim to expand that across the region when time allows. Yes.
So thank you, Moses, for your introduction and for telling us a bit about your work. We will come to know more about your work as we go along. Now I would request Aditi to tell us a bit about her work. Aditi is from Mumbai and India. So Aditi, please tell us about yourself and a bit about your work. Welcome, Aditi.
Hello everyone, I am Aditi Date. I am part of Samarth Bharat Vyaspeeth for last 12 years and working as a coordinator of Signal School for last 5 years. I am basically looking after smooth running of Signal School, arranging finances, taking care of all facilities required by school, and finding new opportunities for school and our children. This is my introduction, and should I tell you about the brief about my work? Hello?
Yes, Aditi.
Yeah.
Please tell about your work also.
We can find a lot of children.
Hello, Aditi. Please tell about your work also.
Yeah, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We can find lot of children out of school and they are living on street, helping their families to earn livelihood by doing some business like selling balloons or selling some toys, or maybe sometimes they are just begging on roads. So what is the outcome? These kids become either addict or thieves. So we have come up with an innovative concept, and this concept is providing mainstream education to the children who are living on the street. To provide primary and secondary education by a friendly education. It's not a education that we generally see in schools. So we have developed a different kind of system to teach these kids. Hello?
Yes, Aditi, it's
Yeah.
fine.
Our school basically start at 9 a.m. in the morning until 7 p.m. kids are in our school. Apparently, we arranges lot of activities for children's physical, emotional, and social development. They are provided with all basic services like food, clothing, shelter, medical camps, exposure visits, everything arranged by us. And we have appointed well qualified teachers for the holistic development. And I'm proud to say that we have 50 children who are studying right now in our school. And actually, a outcome for our last 5 years, whatever we have taken care of these kids is really awesome. Children have become more active and healthy. They are giving their board exams. They are developing interest in students as well as parents for the education. And children are exploring their talents in our school. Signal Shala has felicitated by a Vice President of India, adoring a position of nationwide unto the best practices of education in education document. 2 students have completed SSC and has started in engineering academics. 2 students have secured admission in renowned private high school. Few students have excelled in science exhibition and earn a visit to ISRO. We are also proud that 2 of our students have got the gold medal in district level skating competition. We have team of Kabaddi, Kho-Kho and Malakhamb. RTO, that is Road Transport Authority, have given a badges of Goodwill Ambassador to our 11 students. And feather in our cap is our robotic lab, well-equipped playground, science lab, computer cell, and our experimental junior KG, that is we called as a Balwadi. And I'm really proud to announce that one of our students who has just passed our diploma in engineering has secured a white collar job in Eureka Forbes Limited. So this is what is Signal School is, and I'm proud that I'm part of it.
Okay, thank you so much, Aditi, for your introduction and the introduction of your work as part of Signal School. Now we will move on to Celeste from, she is the board member of an organization in Cambodia, and she herself lives in France. So Celeste, welcome, and please come and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Deepa. So I am French American. Hello, I'm French American living outside of Paris and working on the board of directors for a French NGO that's called, in English, it's called For a Child's Smile. And this NGO has the mission of taking children from destitution or from great poverty and bringing them to a vocation. So let me tell you a little bit about the history of this NGO. 25 years or so ago, a French couple was traveling and they went to Phnom Penh in Cambodia, and they were saddened and dismayed to see children living in the garbage dumps, eating in the garbage dumps, sleeping in the garbage dumps, and sometimes being crushed to death in the garbage dumps. And this was in 1995. And you need to remember that from 1975 to 1979, Cambodia suffered from a genocide by the Khmer Rouge. And there were a number of young men, especially, and young people who were killed. So what that meant was that 20 years later, the traumatized children were becoming parents, which made it very difficult for their own children. So we started small because the first thing children asked when this French couple on the garbage dump said, well, what can we do to help you? What do you want? And they thought, well, maybe they'd need better clothes, better equipment. And the children said, we want one meal a day. We want to be able to eat once a day. So it started small with a meal, some medical care because the children had sores all over. And I was thinking about your organization, IDT, which is small now, but it may grow because we started with 20 children, then 200, and we currently are helping 6,400 children, mainly in Phnom Penh, which is the capital of Cambodia, and also some other children outside. So we focus on, as I said, feeding. Children come to school, and this is probably the best meal they get every day. So they'll have lunch and a snack. We do healthcare for children, and we used to have before a roving, like a van that would go to the countryside to bring medical care. We have nursery school. We have classes for mothers. We have grade school. And interesting is that we do some grade school or elementary school ourselves. And we also support children who go to the public schools because that we want to encourage them to use the public schools if they can. And so we were doing this, and we also house some children who cannot stay with their family because of the condition of their parents. The parents can just not take care of children. So we call this protection. And so that's one thing we do. We also train mothers to have skills. And we realized in about 2000 that it was good to send children to school, but then when they stopped, they would go back to becoming prostitutes for the girls or working in garment factories or having very low-level jobs. And we realized that it was essential to do vocational training. So we now have 5 vocational training schools. One is a preparatory school. The others teach them building trades like electrician, paint, building maintenance, plumbing. We have a business school that teaches accounting, sales, human resources, marketing. We have a hotel school that teaches restaurant skills like cooking, waitering, taking care of hotels, front office. And we have a cinema school, which is probably one of the few in Cambodia and a very good one. So basically, we have after-school activities, we have summer camps, so we really try to take care of, as we can, the whole part of the child. So that is, we call ourselves PSE, French pour instruire d'enfants. So you can look up pse.ong to see in English what we do. So thank you, Deepa. That's us.
So thank you so much, Celeste, for giving us a very nice overview of your initiative and showing us how in 25 years you can grow from nursery to vocational training to also, you mentioned to me that you also cater to the needs of children with disabilities who are so much part of the vulnerable group of children. So thank you so much, Celeste, for the introduction. And as we go along, we will know more about your work. So now I would like to ask Gitanjali to tell us about her work in Kolkata with Anando. Gitanjali, welcome, Gitanjali.
Hello, everyone. And thanks, Deepa, for inviting me on this webinar.
Are you there with us, Gitanjali?
Yeah, can you hear me? Hello.
Yes.
We can hear you, Gitanjali. Carry on.
Okay. So hello, everyone. And thank you, Deepa, for inviting me on this webinar. I am basically a social worker by profession and have been working with children from disadvantaged backgrounds for the last almost 30 years. In 2006, together with a few friends, we started this organization called Anando. Anando means joy, happiness. In Hindi, it would mean Anand. And that is basically the USP of our organization. Because we wanted to create a space where children would be happy, where they would find security, they would feel safe. And where they could be themselves and explore themselves. And we are a small organization. We work with children from the local slum populations. And at present, we have about 70 children who come to us. We have various programs for the children. Our two basic areas of work, one is recreation, which is basically a Sunday like a club where all 70 come. They don't come together, they come in little groups. But that's a space which all the children love. And when they come to our center, they take part in various kind of creative activities, and one part of the day is spent in outdoor play and sort of organized games, because that is again something that they don't have much access to. They play among themselves, but quite often the play will dissolve into a fight and someone will walk off with the ball or the bat or something. So this is also a place where especially the teenage girls, they get to play, they get to run around, because that's something that they are not allowed to do otherwise. So that is Sunday. And the other days we teach after school. Most of our children go to government sponsored schools, and but they are, almost all of them are first generation learners. So they don't get much help at home with the schoolwork. And there are two groups of children, one who tend to start falling back, and one group who are very bright and who are not challenged enough and therefore become bored and then start falling back. So the idea is to, when they come to our center, uh, the teachers help them with the schoolwork. It's like a tuition, like a coaching center. But at the same time, our groups are very small. So the children also get guidance, and they get help with particular areas where they either need to do a little bit more or where they are falling behind. I myself am also a teacher and also a mentor, and that is my sort of main role in Anando, apart from the admin kind of work. The role that I really enjoy is being a mentor and being a teacher. And apart from this, we run libraries, we work with government schools, uh, we find scholarships for children who are very bright and who need maybe a more challenging environment for their education. So we support them to go to bigger schools. And yeah, so in a nutshell, that's what we do. It's been 14 years since Ananda was started. And starting again with a very small group of maybe 20 children. Uh, Today we have about 70, but we have on purpose kept ourselves to how much we can manage ourselves, because all of us, we love interacting with the kids and we love being their mentors and their friends. So we wanted to keep it to that extent that we can continue to interact with them. And it's, like I said, it's been 14 years, and we have children who have moved on, who are grown up, who are young men and women now. But it is really heartening to see that they come back to us every time there's a program, every time there's a picnic. All our ex-students are also there, which is a very nice thing for most of us who work there. And so in a nutshell, that's what we do. And yeah.
So thank you, Gitanjali, for telling us in a nutshell, as you mentioned, what you do and what Anando does. It's really heartening to see that all four initiatives are really striving hard to make good citizens of the world, good human beings, and contributing to the lives of children from poor families who are vulnerable and who really need attention. So I'm so happy to have all of four of your share all your experiences. Now we will move on to trying to understand that in the current pandemic situation, which may also go on for quite some time now, because we don't know how long it will take to, we will have to attend to protocols of social distancing. We will have to also maintain sanitation and hygiene, and also take all sorts of precautions. So in this situation, it would be interesting to know and for others to learn how you are managing to reach out to the children, and how all four groups are trying hard to make the children learn and not miss out on their studies and not have a gap in their education. So maybe Gitanjali, you could only begin by telling us how you at Anando are trying to bridge these gaps and reach out to the children.
Yeah, so the lockdown was very sudden. In Bengal, we were already in lockdown when the national lockdown was announced. But we all thought it's going to be a week, maybe 2 weeks. So we didn't really make much preparations. And then sort of it hit us that um, not only are we all going to be at home, but for the children who come to us, it's also going to be a break in their studies, and which was a really worrying thing. So initially, we kept waiting to see what would happen, but then after about 3 weeks, we started classes, so to speak. Now we didn't know what to do. We didn't know what would work. But eventually, what we found is luckily, most of our children had access to WhatsApp. Either there were smartphones at home, or they had geophones, which are keypad phones, which allow WhatsApp to be installed on them. So that was a lifesaver. There were just a few, I think, 2 or 3 who didn't have access, but they could share their neighbor's phone or somebody else's phone. And so what we started doing was the initial days were very funny because we are 7 teachers and each one was doing what was comfortable for her or him. And so it was a big mess. And we would meet every week through a conference call and talk about what works and what is absolutely not working. But eventually we came to a common ground, and what we started doing was uh, doing to start with revision work, what we'd already done with the kids, and just giving them lots of stuff to do, to think about, to write, and basically trying to keep them stimulated. Um, then there were teachers who were teaching by, our groups are very small. So one teacher normally would have maybe 2 or 3 children at a time. So she would be calling them on a conference call and then talking to all of them. One teacher started making videos on grammar of all things and then posting those. So we found that that was working. So eventually we've come down to a pattern where we use WhatsApp a lot. We send them the work. The children work out whatever they have to do on their in their exercise books, take photographs and send them back to us. Um, Initially, correcting on the phone was a huge challenge for the teachers, but we've all figured out different ways in which you could handle that. And I think now, after 5 months, we are in a good space. And what we found is that on the positive side, the children have started writing a lot. Writing is something many of them are a little apprehensive about. And the tendency is to write, uh, I mean, to learn something by rote and then write. But the way we've been asking them to think and the kind of questions that we've been giving them, they've been, they need to actually apply themselves. And so initially, where they were hesitant, they've just got better and better at writing and at thinking on their own and not depending completely on what notes or what the teacher has said, and and believing that what they are saying is right, because quite often they are right, and most often they are right. So, so it's had a positive side, of course. It's been difficult. There are lots of issues with teaching like this, which I think maybe later in the conversation we'll come across. Mm, there are lots of issues in terms of finance, because most of our families, the main bread earner is not earning, and so there is. I mean, they're very constricted in terms of budget. So we have to be very careful to see that we are not using a lot of phone data, because that is what gets used, and then they have to recharge the phone. Quite often, once the phone, sort of the money which is on the phone finishes, many families don't recharge immediately. They do because they want their children to continue to have classes, but I know personally that it's quite tough for many of them. So we try to see that as much as they can, the work is offline, that when they are working, they work on in their exercise books using their textbooks. And it's only when they have to give the answers, give back the work, that they take photographs and send us, or when the teacher is sending, she sends the things through WhatsApp. So the child has to just copy it down, the questions, and do that. As time is passing, more and more now we are trying to tackle newer subjects and newer topics. That is proving to be a different challenge by itself. We are depending a lot on conference calls, a lot on sort of WhatsApp. Meetings like this using Zoom or Google Meets and all that is a bit tough because it uses data, which most of our children find difficult to keep recharging their phones. Yeah, so that is basically what we've been doing in tackling the thing, the educational needs. The schools, many of the schools have also been having classes online. So the children are a bit under stress because there's a lot more work than they normally would have. And they're managing okay. Some are doing well, some are not doing so well in managing the stress of that, in being sort of keeping up to date. There are other issues in terms of development issues. Depression is very common. Not feeling good, just don't feel like it, are things which we hear very often. So while we're on the phone with them, we also try to cheer them up, tell them funny things, tell them that we are also feeling bored, and let's do something else. Maybe the studying will be not so much of just writing, but thinking or imagining some situation. So to try and keep it interesting and to try and keep them engaged. So that is what we are doing in terms of education. Back to you, Deepa.
So, yes, thank you, Gitanjali, for briefing us about how you all have tried to harness the use of technology at its minimalist level so that the vulnerable groups do not use too much of their resources, but are still able to get access to education, and their learning levels, as you said, have really improved a bit, to say that they are able to write better, they're able to think better. But at the same time, you've also voiced some challenges related to their isolation, basically social isolation, and they are not the only group who is facing this challenge, and we have other groups also facing these challenges, and sooner or later we need to address the mental health issues of our populations across the globe. So that is there. Thank you so much, Gitanjali. Now, since we are at India, Aditi, would you like to share the innovative mechanisms through which Signal School is reaching out to the children in this phase of the pandemic? Aditi, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. Hello.
Yes, yes, Aditi.
During this pandemic, main challenge for us was, see, basically all the families or all the students who are coming to our school, they stay on road. They are totally homeless. So in this pandemic situation, our main challenge was to just to keep them safe. We have to provide them food. Then we have to see that their families are also safe. They are not getting any illness, or because, see, basically now doctors are not available. Second challenge we faced is, as Gitanjali said, we faced challenge for fundraising. See, because just imagine 50 students are staying in a school along with their families. So every day we have to provide them breakfast, lunch, evening snacks, and dinner. There are few kitchens who are on a regular basis providing, giving us lunch or a dinner. They are closed because of pandemic. So arranging foods for so many families is a big challenge for us. Somehow we managed. Second thing we faced is, see, school was running, and teachers, those who are staying nearby, they could come to school and they could take lessons or classes for students. But those who are not staying here, or they are not able to come to the school on a regular basis. So the teachers who are residing nearby, they had to work on a double shift, so that, we couldn't share the workload for them. This was the another challenge. And on top of it, there was heavy rain, so it was just a nightmare for us. But somehow we could manage that, and we are really struggling hard for finances and fundraising, because now on a regular basis we have to take just care of 50 students, but because of this pandemic we have to take care of their families also, their siblings also. So somehow we are managing that. Thank you, Deepa.
So is there anything that you did to enhance the learning level by use of new methods or new systems of learning that you would like
Yes.
to add to?
Yes. See, basically, these families or these children are from tribal areas. Okay. So they only speak a tribal languages or local languages from which tribe they are. So when they are in school, so we have to take efforts first. Our first initial effort to, to just make them understand that how education is more important for them, how it will improve their life. So this was our first challenge or first task. Once we succeeded in that task, our second challenge or second task was a language. Because in our school we have either English or Marathi or Hindi as a, first language. But what language they used to speak is very different. So
I was
first,
asking Aditi, in COVID times, what kind of innovations or pedagogical changes did you do to enhance their learning? In the pandemic situation, where
yeah,
you cannot have so many children in the class together,
that's what I'm
methods are
saying.
really-
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. That in pandemic, not only 50 students, but along with 50 students, their families and siblings were also there in our school.
Yes, yes.
So see, students, those who are in our school, we have to take care of their parents as well as their siblings also. So language was a barrier between us. So first we have to, make them understand why you should be here. It's a pandemic. How you should take care of yourself. So these all things we had to take care of. And it was really challenge for us.
Right. Yes, continue, Aditi.
Yeah, this was the biggest challenge for us.
Right. Anything else you would like to add to the challenges?
Uh, no, that's, I think that's the biggest challenge we had.
Okay, so yes, I think it is not about just the child. We have extended our roles far beyond to look at the families and their basic needs of, food, shelter, and health. So that is an overall responsibility that one takes on when we are looking at the lives of children from vulnerable groups and families. So thank you so much, Aditi. We'll come back to you soon. So Celeste, would you now like to join in and tell about PSE and all its efforts? I think it's a very big, large organization and is catering to a lot of children. So Celeste, please come and tell us more.
Yes, so in terms of education, in April, the announcement was made that schools were to be closed and that all the children had to leave. So that meant that students had to go home. The children who were living on our campus area, because their families couldn't take care of them, we had to find foster families that would take them in. And some families currently had 6 children and they would take 6 more children in. But we were relieved to have been able to find decent families for the children who couldn't go back to their own home, including, and you mentioned before, Deepa, and thank you for this, children with disabilities, because we have about 20 students with severe disabilities. And that was one good thing that came out of the pandemic, was that some of them went back to their families, and the families are now able to take care of them. And we also found that there is a government institution which took in some of these children, and whereas before the quality and level was not very good, that has now improved. So we're comfortable that these children are in a good location to take care of them for now. Of course, we will track that very closely. So in terms of going back to the school, we did distance learning, as you've both talked about, and that was basically on smartphones because they were lucky enough to have smartphones. We also did a lot of paper copies. So we have a social department, and they would make paper copies, and then they would drive the paper copies to the children's houses. So the children would have to then do the work, and we've seen videos where they'd be sitting on the floor, with people all around working on their school projects. And then the social workers would then go back and then collect the work. And that was difficult because these children live in, as in your areas, small homes, no chairs, many people. Their parents may not be able to read or write. So it's been a challenge. We've had some dropouts, but not significant, so which is important. We're tracking that, but we're concerned that there may be some dropouts as children find work to help their families. And they think, oh, so I have work, I can do this job, even though it gives them no future. And as you said, parents are not finding work. We feel that there's about 400,000 Cambodian parents who have lost their job. Sorry. The other thing I wanted to mention about is that because we had to close the center to the children, we had staff coming in to work. So the teachers were doing a lot of work on learning pedagogical skills, preparing the classes for the children, correcting them, preparing the papers. So the teachers were pretty much occupied, but we have a lot of other staff. So we put the staff to work on renovating buildings, painting, cleaning up, whatever. And so we did keep the staff occupied. And one thing we did, which we have 650 staff in Cambodia, and we have 5 staff in France, and then many of us are volunteers. And so the board of directors, I'm on the board of directors, we decided to maintain the salaries for all the staff. And we just made a decision this week to continue to the end of October at least, where we pay them full salary, which is a big advantage for these families. It's we have some cases we have fewer expenses, but in some cases we have more masks, gel, as you mentioned before, family. So we take care of families. Children who come to our school, when they've stopped working, say in the garbage dump or elsewhere, it's a lack of income for their family. So we've compensated by giving rice to the families. So the families would come every Friday and get some rice. But now the children are not eating at school. So we've increased that. And for example, I was just reading something. 1 week we gave 45 tons of rice. So we give rice and we've added noodles, we've added fish, and we've added some sauce that Cambodian people like. So, you know, we do have that effort there to help the families, because otherwise they're going to be hungry. As you were saying, Adi, it's, you know, taking care of the whole family and they need to eat. So that's students, family. The other issue I want to mention is about the workers, the international workers, because we do have volunteers or some international staff. And it was an issue for them because they couldn't go back home, or they had to rush and take the last flights out of Cambodia, and they didn't know, should they leave, should they not leave? So it was quite stressful for some of them, because at one point, we found out that to come back into Cambodia, you'd have to have $30,000, was it $30,000 or $3,000 available, testing. It was quite complex. So the international volunteers were quite stressed. Some of them returned back to their countries. One of the challenges, we talked about challenges, has just been to know what is the government going to decide. Because we work with the Ministry of Vocational Training, with the Ministry of Education, with the Social Ministry for the children living on site, with the Health Ministry. So a lot of different guidelines. It's very complex and it changes all the time. So we think that school, next year's school, which should be starting now, will start in January, but then we have to finish the current school year because they've not been in class since April. So we think maybe it will start in September sometime, or maybe in October. That also is stressful for the management team in Cambodia and a bit for us, but we're a little removed from it. And some of our students in vocational training have been able to do apprenticeships where they go and do training, which has been a big, big help for those students. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the families, when these social workers go and bring the papers, the school papers, or when the food gets delivered, that is an opportunity for the parents to talk with some of our social workers. And in July, we started for the staff meditation sessions, 1 hour every Friday, and they call it meditation Qigong. So it's with Qigong and meditation. So they did start that 1 hour a week for the staff. So anyway, it's been a bit of a challenge, but we're finding that there are some things that are positive going out in terms of finding homes for the children with disabilities, finding that some families can take their children back, use of distance learning or electronic learning, even though there are a number of students who don't have access to smartphones, as you've said, and you brought up the issue about the data, the data consumption. But I think there will be some positive things coming out of this, in spite of the many, many negative things. And Cambodia, there are 300 official cases, which is not much for 15 million people. Now, obviously, India, you're much bigger, and France, we're 4 times bigger. But it's very low number of cases, and according to official numbers, no deaths. So we're wondering, even if that's underestimated, those countries in Southeast Asia apparently have not had many, casualties like Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia. So anyway, that's my overview. So thank you, Deepa.
Yeah, thank you, Celeste. It's really heartening to know that Cambodia does not have so many casualties. So in that sense, it makes life a bit easier. But it's really wonderful to know how how we adapt during even pandemic or crisis situations and find positives in the entire mechanism. You all have been able to send children back to their families. So you shifted from boarding to community living, which is a very good sign. You also had a lot of innovations in engaging the staff and doing other non-routine work. So that is also nice to know. You all have also begun meditation. So you all do sense the emotional and mental needs of the staff. So I think it's a wonderful effort that you all are doing in coordinating with all the ministries and all the activities of fundraising and everything. So Celeste, it's wonderful to listen to you. We'll come back one more round to you. So thank you so much. And now we move to Moses. Moses will bring us insights from Africa. So over to you, Moses. Welcome.
Thank you, Deepa. I see there's lots of interesting things happening on the East Asian or Asian side. Um, so as far as from the context in which I work is concerned, I'd first of all say that the mentorship program in which I usually run, we had to suspend it for the year because urgent and more needs arose out of the pandemic. I mean, because of the pandemic. Because ideally what happened is that our mentorship program is normally pegged with the school calendar years. But because of the lockdowns, and I mean, as like in Kenya, for example, we didn't have much of a lockdown except for the borders being closed, but we had curfews. We had curfews as well as the suspension of the entire school academic year, which still remains suspended. No schooling has been happening since it was suspended in March. So what happened is that, and this was also happening at a time when most of our partners who usually house street children, youths, are already struggling with implementing government directives. So from 2018 and most of last year, the Kenyan government, for example, has been coming up with a new policy that kind of bars housing of children in children homes. Ideally, the directive was that the focus should be more on integrating children with their families as quick as possible. For example, when you get them from the streets. So already the stakeholders were coming up, I mean, we're trying to take kids back into their homes, because what they usually do is that when the school calendar year is happening, then they'll have them in the rehab centers, in the children homes, and then during the holidays they take them back home. But then now in this process, the pandemic happens, the school calendar year gets suspended, and then so what happens is that now is the question of, are we going to have them in the home or are we going to send them home to the parents? So most of them opted on sending the kids back to their families. And in that situation now is a question of asking them, okay, now how do we continue assisting them when they're with their families, especially since now there's even not less learning happens when they're home. Because usually the time they spend with their families is about just a few weeks, sometimes even a week or two, then they come back and go to school. But now is a time whereby now there's curfew and nothing is happening. And so even the families are out of work because of the curfews. So what happened is that the focus has been much on providing the urgent need of food. So for example, our partners have ramped up street feeding programs for the kids that are still on the streets, as well as providing rationing to families where some of the students that usually benefit from the home programs are in. Innovatively, I think also like what has happened is that they've been able to raise the support in terms of the food that they usually get in terms of donations and funding, etc. I think for the first time we've seen that the street feeding program, for example, has really been so extensive. And this was necessary because, because of lockdown measures and the curfews, the restaurants where street children kind of usually get their foods were closed. There were no people in the streets walking around to provide money or any kind of food. So it's a question of like, it's a double tragedy. You're already struggling with hunger and where to get your food, but then now the people that usually support you, they are also out of business. So unless the street feeding programs are kind of ramped up and efforts are increased, the survival became so difficult. And that's where most of the stakeholders that I know and that I've worked with have actually put in their efforts. Because ideally the whole learning stops, and you couldn't risk it, because even at a home, if word got out or any organization that you are having a meeting of many number than the required people, so it would be a risk for you in terms of policy, in terms of regulation. So all they could do is to ensure that they send as many kids back to their parents as possible, and then support them with the feeding programs when they're with their families, as well as continue with the street feeding programs. In terms of learning continuation, some organizations, and these actually are some Indian companies based in Kenya, were able to provide some the laptops for children to support learning. And one of our partners who runs a program in one of the slums was able to somehow apply some social distancing and be able to support learning to continue. But there's just, I mean, it's limiting in terms of the number of devices you have are also quite few. But again, it also comes the question of, because it's the first time you're also providing this population with technology. They've never used it before. So it's another question of how quick can you get them to learn the basics? Then you can start facilitating learning using it. And then again, how many can you be able to support at a particular time? So are you going to be doing like rotational or like the frequency? And again, there's just little time you can spend with them because of the curfew and the physical distancing and all that has just been happening. So I think the challenges that have been faced in, as far as the Kenyan context, for instance, is concerned, is the question of struggling with the policy aspect, as well as access to technology and how to use technology, and of course, the whole aspect of famine. And because I've spent most of this time also in Cape Town in South Africa, this is also a challenge that even in this context, as far as learning with marginalized populations, you know, there's lots of huge slums, for example, in Cape Town, and even here, learning kind of stopped because of lockdowns, and because at the university where I'm doing a program in inclusive innovation, we spent lots of time trying to come up with ways like how do we support the urban populations, like people in the slums for learning to continue. We realize this just so much has stopped, because on the one hand, we're talking about access, we're talking about using technology, but how many people can access it? Now, I mean, like very few. Again, in terms of usage, in terms of skills to now be able to adopt and use technology, it's just been challenging. And it's in those situations where now aspects of mental health also come into question. People are struggling with anxiety. When are schools going to resume? When are schools going to resume? Where, for example, is our food going to come from? Where are we going to survive the next day? Are we going to get COVID? How are we even going to practice physical distancing when already you live in a small room? You live in a small room and there's 5 of you. So I mean, those are emerging challenges that COVID kind of trying to make us realize. I mean, they already existed, but at least now we're seeing the reality of what can happen when there's even more requirements needed as far as learning and dealing with those is concerned. Yeah, so that's a little bit from this side. Deepa, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Moses, so much. You have very beautifully brought out all the challenges, right from the basic need to eat, that is what is required, to their employment and to their mental health needs, and to the challenge of learning completely getting stalled. So I think this is a common thread that has come out in all the presentations. I would just like to go back to all the panelists one round again, and would like to ask that, is there anything else you would like our viewers to know or to understand better? Then we could just go to each panelist before we wind up. So Gitanjali, would you like to say something more? Or you feel complete? How is it?
No, it's interesting that across the world, that we're talking about different countries and the issues are largely very similar. In terms of, learning is there, but there are other more pressing issues as well. And I just wanted to add a few more things that came up in our, very specifically the teaching online. Uh, One was that it was interesting to see how the children were adapting to this new way of teaching. And what we found is for most of our children, they're very used to a particular routine and a particular way of teaching. And this was suddenly completely different, not only for us teachers, but also for them. And there, what we found that the children who are a little brighter, who are a little more clued in, they were able to adapt uh, quite smoothly because children are resilient, so they adapted. What was difficult was children who are a little slow, who take a little more time to pick up. For them, not having a visual component to their learning was very difficult, uh, especially in subjects like, say, maths or any of the sciences or geography, where it helps to actually see what you're doing. And here they are depending mainly on hearing and reading the textbook. And that's a bit boring after a while. So, uh, but all of them with time have come up to the challenge and they've been able to adapt somewhat. It's not the same as teaching face to face. It's not the same. But I think, safely say that as far as our 30, 40 odd children that we teach are concerned, they've at least uh, somehow sort of adjusted and managed the situation somewhat. We're lucky that they have access to phones, whether it's a keypad phone or a smartphone. Mostly out of the 35 children that we have who we teach, I think there were two who didn't have access to phones. But even that, with time, the families were able to arrange something, and so that helped. The other issues with the phone was, of course, that there's usually just one phone in the family, and there are probably 3 or 4 children who are all having online classes at various, either from school or from NGOs or whatever. So there's always this fight going on as to who's going to use the phone and when are you going to. So fortunately, we were able to adapt. We would, the families which had more children, uh, especially where the children are senior students, we were able to sort of work around that and fix timings so that they could, each child would know when they would have the phone. We've had children who've been sending us work at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, because the father comes back or the uncle comes back with the phone at maybe 11 o'clock. And by the time the child gets the phone, it's 12 o'clock in the night. But even those children have just risen to the challenge. They've not given up. They've not thrown up their hands and said that, I can't stay awake. And we told her that you don't have to, you give it to us later. And she said, no, I will send it to you. And even I get suddenly this ping at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you suddenly see this young girl has been sending you all her work. So that's been an interesting thing to see. I think the challenges of the food has also been there because the earnings have come down. So Ananda has also been giving monthly rations. But one of the things that we did, which worked pretty well, was this thing of, a lot of our children were pining to come to the center. They were missing seeing us, seeing their friends, being together. So what we did is we asked them, in terms of food, we also provide them with a snack every time they come. And it's usually a high protein snack because most of them suffer from malnutrition. So we asked them, what is it that you miss the most? Which is the thing that you miss the most? And they gave us all these options of, I miss this, I miss that. So with every food packet that we've given, there's been one item that has been only for the children, and that's according to their wishes. So we either have peanut chicky. Someone wanted peanut chicky. Someone wanted to have cake. Someone wanted to have a particular kind of jhalmuri, if you know Bengali. So basically puffed rice in a particular form that we used to give, and and that, and in fact I think once we even gave them instant noodles because there was no instant noodles available in the city, and they were pining to have Maggi noodles. So, and I think just the fact that that one little item would go in the pack because they were not allowed to come and see us. The one of the parents would come to take the rations, but there would be a separate little bag only for the children, and that really helped to perk up, to just feel that we are we are all there still, we are all connected still. We may not be meeting each other, but yeah, the connection still remains, and that I think helped a lot in terms of the mental health. So I just wanted to add that that was something
So it's really
quite
amazing,
interesting.
Anjali, how you and your staff have kept the motivation of the children on to even send you all homeworks in the middle of the night, be it cake or jhalmuri.
Yeah,
But it really works. So
it
keep
worked.
on, good work is what I can say. I know that everybody is stressed and really overworked, and we need to find ways to move to that also, to address those issues also. So thank you so much. And now I will ask Bhattu Savanji. He works with Aditi, and he would like to share a bit because he is the founder member of the Signal School in Mumbai. So Bhattu Savanji, please add your thing, even if it is in Hindi, either Aditi or I will translate for the rest. So are you there? Yes.
Thanks a lot, Deepa ji. I just listen all the panelists, and I think that more or less all issues are same. If issues in India, issues in Cambodia, and issues in Africa. I always feel that why this happened from last 100 years. I think that 2 years ago, I am just reading the UNDP report. In that UNDP reports, in the second para of that UNDP report, they mention that the present economic development is rootless, ruthless, powerless, voiceless, and also futureless. Rootless means like our Signal School students and their parents, they all are rootless. They migrated from their native place to mega cities, and everywhere the world we see that migration happens. Even slum peoples, Gitanjali Ghosh ma'am said that they are working in slums. In slum area, 80% of population is coming from migration. In Cambodia and in other areas, there is a migration happens only because of economic development is not happen in similar areas. All panelists share their problems. We also face that problems. But basic root cause problem is that the migrated peoples don't have voice. They are voiceless. There is a rootless, and also they have a voiceless also. In their voice, there is no power. All basically they are not voters, and only because of they are not voters, they are sidelined every time. So we are concentrate on not only the signal school students, their education, their mainstream livelihood, their overall development, but also we are focused on the policy matter also. When in Delhi, Vice President awarded our school as a best practices. At that time, we also share our views with Vice President of India that this is not a matter of felicitate one school in India, they are doing nice job, but we have to develop one nationwide policy for migrated student who on road, who on signals, who on anywhere the country, because in India 9 crores children now on street or signal only, and this is a huge population, and 9 crore is a like a uh, more or less some European countries don't have that much population also, and this much population are laying on the road only. And how we become a superpower if we are not seeing that problems, that children's problem also. So UNDP report says that the present economic development is ruthless, powerless, voiceless, futureless. So we have to uh, rethink about the definition of economic development. And I think that we Signal School have that answer. Even our culture also that have a Sarvena Sukhina Santu, Sarve Santu Niramaya. Yeah, there is a one phrase that poverty anywhere is threat to everywhere. But this phrase also have a negative mindset. Means if there is poverty in any area, people think that there is a threat for another area. I think that this phrase also we have to change. And another we build that our Indian philosophy, Sarvena Sukhina Santu, Sarve Santu Niraya. They all are our brothers and sisters. If the student on Cambodia or anything all over the India or all over the world who are have begging, who have a lack of education, food, and we represent all as a human being, and every nation have create their own policy for these migrated populations, and then only we can overcome these issues. In pandemic conditions, Deepa ji says that what kind of problems you face. The big problem is that how to convince government. In pandemic condition also we want to run the school, because in under the flyover the all students are gathered in such a way that social distancing is a luxury for them. They cannot afford social distancing luxuries. We have to start school in pandemic condition also, because in that case our school is the only hope for them to uh, uh, tackle the corona. And government norms and is that much critical that they never know the actual scenario and actual problems of the grassroots issues. They all are in formatted in the framework that in no schooling, nothing do it in pandemic area. So we have to raise our issues in collective manners, so we can give a justice for them. And thanks Deepa ji to call us, and heartfulness, wellness. We are very thankful. And Moses ji, Moses, good. And Celeste and Gitanjali, yeah, we are welcoming you to in Mumbai, Maharashtra. Please do visit our Signal School, and we can work hard for a better world, better future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Savanji. Very nice said, very nicely said. And nobody would know, would even realize that you don't speak English. You spoke so well, and I would never like to sum up all that you said. I think it is very, very important that we do some policy advocacy also, because as NGOs, we can reach out to only this many number of children. And it is the government and the government schools that reach out to a wide range of children. And their policies should be inclusive, but we see many times that their policies are very exclusive, and the vulnerable sections mostly get left out because they are unable to advocate for their own rights. So thank you so much, Savanji. Now, Celeste, should we move to you, and would you like to add something and throw more insight in this webinar from your side?
Yes, thank you, Deepa. I just wanted to make a comment on what you said about the advocacy with the government, because I know that we have been able to make some changes in the government, allowing our students to go back earlier for apprenticeships. And I think we're able to do that because we're either the biggest or the second biggest NGO in Cambodia. And it would be interesting if the smaller NGOs, for example, in India, could band together and go to make advocacy with the government as a bigger force altogether. Anyway, just to comment on that. Two things I wanted to talk about on the pedagogical changes. What I see is that there will be probably more distance learning. And I also think that companies or NGOs will feel more comfortable using online tools, because there are many videos online that students can use rather than creating their own learning methods. And I've been pushing that for a while, hard to take off, but I think that now we will start looking more on what's available on the internet. That's my first point. Second point is about communication, because in this pandemic, it's been very important to communicate, and I think we need to do it more. Communicate with all the stakeholders, with our employees, obviously, with our volunteers, with the children, with the parents of the children, so encourage them and motivate them that their children go back to school, with our donors so they see what we're doing with the funds that they're giving us, and hopefully they will continue to do that. So I think we realize that communication in pandemic times is very critical because people are struggling with this crisis. So thank you. Those were my 2 points.
Okay, thank you, Celeste. And now, Moses, what would you like to add in the end for the community to know more about the situation in Africa?
So first of all, I think Gitanjali was mentioning a very interesting way as well as the challenges. For example, how they were able to use WhatsApp to continue the learning. Then it reminded me of a friend of mine who's in Cape Town, and she has to give her 2 brothers her phone in the evenings to use. They have to rotate. A sister and a brother, they have to continuously rotate to use the phone to continue learning when everything else is closed. And also because as a family, they don't have like a laptop or the other technologies that are used for learning. And so what I'm thinking of, while we've always known that gradually learning is moving more and more towards technology and being remote, and while efforts are being made to provide access to technology, I think this is also a time where, advocacy, as activists and advocacies and people in learning, we need to press more on providing access to technology, like really making technology that is necessary for learning, like in this kind of situations, really more accessible and as inclusive as possible. I think that's the area that I'd like probably to stress, that going forward to increase more education, to increase the literacy rates and levels, and to ensure at least learning continues when situations like this happen. Making technology more inclusive should be given a priority. I mean, like, it's a time where we should actually, I mean, we know that technology adoption of the rate of adoption of technology is increasing more and more across different parts of the world, even in the so-called developing world. Is the question of now, how quickly can we now turn this as a learning point, the pandemic as a learning point, increasing more access to the internet, and even in providing more training on how to use technology. And my main point, at least, even ensuring that every child has a laptop, or every family has a form of computer they can use to continue learning. It's going to be really very important. That's what I can say as a final. And I think we've really covered very interesting points in this conversation as far as learning is concerned during the pandemic and even going forward. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Moses, for your inputs and insights. And I would say that, all of us are really trying hard to attend to the needs of the children and their families, because the child is just not one. So we have to get at the entire family and the ecosystem of the child. And we look at the outer needs, and at the same time, we need to also address the inner needs and the mental health of the families and the children. So at Heartfulness, we offer many tools and techniques. And one of the tools and techniques which are common that could be used for children also, is called Heartfulness Relaxation. It is available on YouTube in several languages. But with your permission, and if the panelists agree, I can do a short Heartfulness relaxation with everybody and the audience out there. So only if you all feel up to it, because it has been quite a long webinar. So I would like to ask your permission. So please let me know if it's okay to go ahead with the relaxation. Yes, tell me.
Yes.
Okay. Gitanjali, is it okay?
Yes.
And Savant, is it okay?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. Aditi, are you on board?
Yes, I'm there.
Okay, so I will just give commands and you just do as I say. And the same thing could be taught to the children. So it's all available on YouTube in several languages. And if you need any help, you can reach out to me. We do teach meditation, but that is for children above 15 years and above. But for children who are younger, only relaxation is applicable. So you can use your good sense and wisdom to see what is applicable where, and whenever there is any help required, you please reach out to any of us. We also have an app which is called Hearts app, and that is available free to download from the Play Store. So that will enable you to have a personal meditation session with a trainer, and the trainers are 160 countries. So shall we now move towards relaxation? I will give the commands in English. So please sit comfortably wherever you're sitting and gently close your eyes. Do not press them hard, just feel relaxed. Move your attention to your toes. and wriggle them a bit. Feel the energy from Mother Earth come up and begin to relax the sole of your feet. This energy moves to your ankles and begins to relax them. And this energy moves slowly up to your feet, lower limbs, and feel them relaxed. Now feel your knees being relaxed. This energy moves to your thighs and feel your entire feet relaxed. This energy slowly moves up to your hips and begins to relax them. Slowly feel the energy move up to your lower back and feel it relaxed. This energy moves up to your upper back and feel your entire back relaxed. Feel this energy move to your stomach area and feel the muscles in your stomach relaxing. This energy moves up to your chest area and begins to relax your ribs and chest muscles. Feel this energy move up to your neck area and feel your neck muscles relaxing. Feel this energy move to your shoulders and feel all the weight from your shoulders being lifted away. This energy moves down to your arms, and first it relaxes your upper arms and then your lower arms till your fingertips. So your entire hands and neck area and shoulders are completely relaxed. Feel all the weight being lifted away and melting away. Move your energy to your face area and feel your facial muscles relaxing. Drop your jaws, relax your chin and your lips, and relax your cheeks and earlobes, your nose and eyes, and then your forehead. Move your attention to the back of your head and feel your head area relaxing. Now your entire body is completely relaxed. Take a minute to scan your body, and if you feel any area that is tensed, please relax it. Now draw your attention to your heart and feel the calmness within. Try to stay in this condition for some time and be connected with your inner self. Once you're ready to come out, you may gently open your eyes. So I would like to take this opportunity before we end the webinar to thank one and all for their contribution, for sharing openly, for letting our viewers and audience know the challenges and issues faced by children from vulnerable sections, especially in the slums, and what more needs to be done. And it is our responsibility collectively, all the stakeholders, to contribute to the benefit of these children who are the future citizens of our countries. And we will all stand united and work in brotherhood as we are all as human beings connected. Gitanjali, Vatu Savanji, Aditi, Celeste, and Moses, and the Heartfulness team for hosting this webinar. Thank you so much, and goodbye and see you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.